You guys ever have this happen where one of your players just won't stop with the pre-rolling? It works like this. Pick up your dice when the DM's focus is on someone else. Roll said dice. If the result is low, stay quiet. If the result is high, then say, I want to do thing, and I just rolled high roll. If you get a low roll, either say nothing and wait, or come at the DM with, I want to do thing. What do I need to roll for that? Because just now, when you rolled and you got a low number, you were just playing around with your d20 and not pushing for a good roll or anything. I had a player that did that all the time. This was the same player that, with a barbarian, never rolled below a 15 on a wisdom saving throw. I don't know if it's an unspoken rule or a written rule, I haven't checked in a while, but just as a good rule of thumb, wait until the DM tells you to roll for something and then roll for that thing. Don't pre-roll because look, it's not pre-rolling, it's straight cheating, honestly. So this happened quite recently. I figured I'd share my own horror story. I'm part of a 5th edition homebrew campaign and play with my wife. There are 5 of us, not including the DM, but the only 2 characters relevant to this are my darling wife, who plays an elven wizard, and the problem player, Mark, from here on out, who plays a tiefling bard. So my wife and I have a rule that we are fine with our characters romancing other characters. We didn't want to be that couple who only roleplay romance with one another. This is important because of Mark. His character immediately took a shine to my wife's character, and he flirted at her regularly. Now, he flirted with most of us and most of the NPCs, so we didn't think anything of it, and she even flirted back on occasion, poorly, as her charisma was abysmal. We've been playing this campaign for about a year at this point, and in-game, my wife's character and the problem player started a romance. Nothing intense, but it was clear in-game that they were romantically involved. I didn't care about this, because it's just a game. Unfortunately, Mark did not see it that way. My wife and I acted like a normal couple when we went to these games. We were engaged and newly married for most of the campaign, and it was time that we enjoyed together. We weren't massive on PDAs, so we'd hold hands, we'd sit next to each other, she'd rest her head on my shoulder, stuff like that. Well, one day, Mark pulled me aside and told me I needed to back off from my wife. I was confused and said, what did he mean, back off? She's my wife, and she instigated most of the physical contact herself. I mean, I apologized if he was uncomfortable, and we'd be more discreet. He then explained that no, it wasn't that he got uncomfortable seeing public affection. It's just that in here, she wasn't my wife. She was his character's lover. I just looked at him like he had 2 heads. I won't repeat exactly what I said, but I ripped him a new one and immediately told the DM and my wife what he'd said. My wife was furious and said he was ridiculous to think she cared more about an in-game relationship over her real-life husband. The DM wrapped up the session after that. My wife made it clear she wasn't willing to play with Mark anymore, and yeah, I agreed. We told the DM we'd be leaving, though he said Mark had been booted from the group, and we were welcome to stay. Given the campaign didn't have any overarching storyline, we started a new campaign the DM was willing to go fresh in, so we stayed with the group and started this new game. We still enjoy our D&D nights, though they are less common now, and we have revised our rule. In-game romances are fine, but only with sane players. Marky, what the fuck? I did a whole video about D&D romance, but one of the main points that I said was that you need to separate yourself from your character. For a lot of people that may seem obvious, but it does bear saying because yeah, stuff like this happens where the lines get blurred. And that is rather unfortunate because it can create really, truly awkward and straight up creepy moments at your gaming table, which is something that no one wants. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of expected the DM to defend Mark, maybe because my faith in humanity is completely lost, but here, the DM actually handled the situation in a pretty mature way. Look, I don't like instantly kicking people from tables, but Mark isn't acting the best, and I think their behavior was bad enough that it warranted some swift action. This was a while ago, but it still hurts all the same. When I do pre-written campaigns, I allow quite a bit of shenanigans, provided we are all chill at session 0 with it. If the players go off script and start screwing around, I'm generally okay with it. It's not my story, so if you want to be goofballs and try to woo Strahd with your song, you compose him by his sweet, sexy, pale legs, that's on you. He probably won't be impressed, but I'm not gonna care if you try it. However, when I homebrew and write my own story, I take it seriously. I spend sleepless nights writing stories to be perfect. I'm not sure anything I'll ever do will top some of my epic campaigns of the past, but I still give it my best efforts. I tell my players this whenever I homebrew anything. So when you're in the middle of an adventure I handcrafted you, it really sucks for you to just not care and goof around. So years back, I was running a D&D session on TeamSpeak, which should certainly date how long ago this was. The players had wanted a storybook fantasy story with a darker, more morally gray twist. We'd had long talks into the night of what kind of story they wanted, what was allowed and what wasn't, and how they wanted everything to go, so I obliged. I spent about 2 weeks feverishly writing and then triumphantly announced a session that Friday. Boy, I had no idea how badly this would go. So the story was set in a sort of semi-Arthurian kingdom where a tyrant of a king ruled. It was gritty and dark, and the king had let a lot of the land get overrun by monsters and creatures from the local swamps. It wasn't a very nice place to live. There was a frog prince, but he was cursed that way, not by a witch, but by a fairy protecting his older sister because he attempted to murder her. The king was unjust and ruled unfairly, not because he was evil, but because he was insane and his paranoid delusions made him lash out, especially after his wife's death. The princess was one of my few objectively good characters, but had run away into hiding from her insane father and was missing. The queen was long dead, but it was said her ghost was haunting an old family keep to the north, something keeping her bound to the earth. The players were forced to rescue the kingdom by a Gaunter O'Dim-like character who saved each one from certain death in their backstories, and now wanted them to stop all the chaos in the kingdom for him, or he'd put them right back where he found them. Not for anything virtuous, he just needed the kingdom quieter because it's where he was inhabiting and the chaos was annoying him. So our heroes had 3 years, in-game, to fix it. So a lot of different plot threads were spun outward for the players to investigate. I thought I gave them a fairly decent spread of things, and I planned out many plot points around each one and how they handled it. I even had plans for if they forsook the choice foisted upon them and tried to break the pact. They took a third option. They just killed everyone. They killed the Frog Prince so he could never redeem himself and become a better king than his father. They found the princess and got bored of escorting her for the few minutes they bothered to do it, and they pushed her into the swamp filled with monsters, ending her arc to become the new queen. They also managed to escape after they killed her, after I roused a bunch of monsters to chase them down, because they had drawn my ire at that point. They basically rolled like gods, and I rolled like garbage, so they dunked on the monsters and left. They ignored the haunted keep entirely, and then led a bunch of bandits on a raid on the castle, which resulted in the king's death. With him dead, they let the bandits enslave the populace as long as they agreed to take them away from the country so they wouldn't bother the entity living there. Thus, the kingdom became a lifeless wasteland, and every single quest that didn't end in murder or extortion was completely ignored. And they triumphantly felt good about escaping the claws at which they were bound by the entity. There was no chaos in the kingdom to bother them because there was no kingdom left. Worse yet, they told me later that this was their plan. They had decided to destroy the kingdom and thought themselves so clever for coming up with it. They were so dead set on outsmarting me and therefore the entity that they never bothered to even check if they could just break the curse and leave, which was also an option. So all these sleepless nights for a campaign to match the specifications that they asked for were completely in vain. They didn't seem even that engaged. Every description and detail of the environment and characters seemed to frustrate them because it was stopping them from murdering whoever was next on their list. I could hear them watching YouTube in the background or playing phone games. It made it hard for me to even continue. And these were such fun players before this. It was incredibly disheartening as an experience that only came about because the players felt offended by the time limit. Apparently they felt railroaded, and rather than tell me this, they decided to ruin the campaign I made for them. To me, that was just normal plot hooks to get the characters invested, but I guess that wasn't how they saw it. I'm not gonna lie, guys, this story was really sad to me because I really feel this DM on many levels. Now, for starters, if you are a DM and you're not having fun in your game, that is completely okay and valid. You need to tell your party that. These players seem to be very different from what the DM had in mind for their campaign. Now, yes, the players did agree to that campaign, and that is a beast we're going to be opening up in a second. But if you are a DM and you're not having a good time, you're allowed to tell your players that. You're allowed to say, hey guys, I'm not having fun running the game the way it's currently going. I think the problem, though, is these players also seem to have a DM versus player mentality. We see this a lot from the DM side, but not from the player side. And yeah, from the player side, it's just as bad. If your group wants a Murder-Hobo kill game, that's great, that's valid, that's fine, but your DM needs to know that. And if you agree to a roleplay heavy, dark, medieval hero campaign, well, then that's what you're playing. Conspiring behind the DM's back and then celebrating when you destroy their game and their world, not great. My college's Dungeons & Dragons Society runs a one-shot event for new players at the start of the first semester. Since they were low on games, I offered to run a one-shot set in my campaign setting that involved a group of spies stopping an evil cult and stealing back some magical items. I said anyone could join, as I've made pre-built character sheets, but if you want to bring your own character, feel free. The only caveat is that they must be level 5 and must be some kind of spy. This is when I got introduced to my problem player, whom we will call Betty. I got a group of 6 people together, and Betty rolls up a pre-built, edgy tiefling assassin/rogue fiend warlock with 14 in dex. I'm immediately concerned that an assassin rogue was her base class by the way, she multi-classed in a warlock after, has such a low dex score, but she reassured me that it's for flavor and roleplay, hence why charisma is her highest stat. I wasn't opposed to a charismatic spy, and I thought I could run with it. Her hit points were shockingly low, and there were some other problems with her sheets, but I didn't have time to fix them, and I had to start running the game. As I began passing out our character sheets, Betty began talking to the other players. She was bragging about how she was really experienced and how she's been playing for a year, despite the fact that all of her campaigns fell through for some reason, and how she DMs, but she is way better as a player. I handed someone a pre-built rogue character sheet, and she started complaining that there's 2 rogues in the party, but I literally didn't have any other character sheets to hand out, and we just continued. One of the other players was brand new, and so I said that if they had any questions, just ask me. Betty assured me that they would take care of it since she was so experienced. Despite me having an extra 5 years of playing and DMing on her, I'm aware the red flags here were glaring, but there wasn't really much I could do and just started anyway. The party arrive on the island and begin traversing through the dense jungle. They are super careful to maintain stealth as to not be seen by the cultist. With a successful perception check, they discover one of their allies in a cage being guarded by 2 cultists talking. The wizard casts Comprehend Languages, and the cleric casts Pass Without Trace to stay hidden. The group are discussing their next move when Betty interrupts everyone to tell me she wants to cast Eldritch Blast at the guards. I ask if she is sure because it will break stealth for everybody, and she says yes. The rest of the party obviously didn't want her to do it, but she insisted on it and hit. Everyone was asking her why she did that because, you know, they are spies and they're trying to maintain stealth. She just said it's what a character would do, which is a bold claim to make when, I cannot stress this enough, you're a spy too! I roll with it, and instead of this mini-sode being an introduction to roleplay, a slight dungeon crawl, and a final boss for new players, Betty turns it into 3 hours of combat because after breaking stealth, she immediately runs to the boss room. So much for high charisma who thrives in social encounters. There's another thing, she barely roleplayed. Her only moments of genuine roleplay was her character flipping off people and saying, "F*** you," which made everyone roll their eyes. So much for high charisma character who was built for roleplay. In order to keep the length down, here's a summary of the other BS she pulled off in a space of 3 hours. Added bardic inspiration to a death save after I said I don't allow that and proceed to ignore me and just do it anyways. She was weirdly insistent on romancing one of the NPCs despite me saying that she isn't interested in your character. She just wouldn't let it go. Despite me saying that I don't use the flanking rule, she kept telling the brand new player to use it and get advantage after I said multiple times I don't use it. Kept using the hex spell wrong, and even cast it despite the fact she had no spell slots left, and lied about it. I figured this out after the game finished. When the session ended, Betty asked if I'd be interested in continuing this as a full campaign, and I've never said no quicker in my entire life. I couldn't wait to leave. The only thing I can hope that comes of this is that I didn't put any of the new players off of TTRPGs. Everyone was sick of Betty's garbage by the end of the game, and I never want her at one of my tables ever again. This really shook my confidence as a DM, but it did make me grateful for the people I usually play with. If I run this one-shot again next year, I will be sure not to allow another edgy spotlight-hogging lone wolf rogue at my table. TLDR, spotlight hogging apparently experienced player brings their edgy lone wolf rogue to my spy one-shot, proceeds to immediately break stealth for the rest of the party and run ahead of everyone whilst doing no roleplay, despite insisting that her character was built for social encounters, ruining the game for everyone else. Well, we have yet another main character syndrome edgelord player. This one has a few problems to talk about, a cornucopia of issues, if you would. I think the biggest issue is this player is surrounded by brand new players. And like the OP said at the end, this could absolutely turn someone off of D&D when you have an instigator at your table who is ruining the game, for lack of a better phrase. Could randomly Eldritch blasting the guard for no particular reason end in a very interesting encounter? I mean, maybe. I'm sure someone out there can pull it off, but clearly this player is not that person. And this party is not the kind of party where you want to be doing that kind of thing. These are new players. If you toss them into a super tense and, more importantly, super random encounter, well, it's a little bit harder to get engaged. Mild NSFW warning. So, this is a pseudo-GURPS game, but the primary form is creative group writing, as the roleplay was primarily driven by character development and interaction. Here's the premise. In an Earth that once was, Leviathans from either another dimension, inside the Earth, or outer space, it was never specified which, came to the Earth and twisted it with their influence. We had things like turtles the size of Tasmania floating around the Pacific, causing the landmass's environment to constantly change. A floating island, which was once Mauritius, was in orbit around the equator. The entirety of what was once New England being covered in an entire ecosystem in an urban landscape, with photosynthesizing skyscrapers, food growing out of supermarket and stores, because the nearby Leviathan was the aspect of city. A lot of what remained of Europe being reduced to a medieval European fantasy because Leviathan regressed everything in there, while parts of Africa now resembled Afrofuturism due to the Leviathan's influence. A freaking computer tower, literally an arcology that was also a giant computer, in the middle of Alexandria, Egypt. Throw another plot device in which colonists from folded space that may or may not have been descended from a future that never was but now is, returning to their lost home to find out what happened to it, and boy, you do have a setting full of pure insanity. But the most notable one of the Leviathans was the one whose influence turned humans into furries, or it uplifted animals into furries, sometimes even creating a hybrid, such as, for example, an anthropomorphic Night Stalker from Fallout, Snake Coyote thing. They were named Snick-Coyote. A majority of players would play these, since there were, of course, furries there, and yet these were the sane ones. A lot of the players would play their furry characters not as Sparkle Dogs or Mary Sue OCs, but as people who were coming to terms with their changed bodies, people who simply never knew anything else, or even making constant jokes with regards to what the characters' bodies were like. And a lot of people would make all sorts of jokes, or try to come up with interesting things their characters would use when combining things from different times to explore different areas of the world that once was. For example, we had people working from areas with high tech, making the types of medieval weaponry that would have never existed back then, or medieval knights walking side by side carrying non-lethal dubstep guns along with talking wombats on roller skates. Or a gorilla techno professor fixing his own fantastical crystal car using his hands and feet to manipulate multiple things, or people organizing an expedition to potentially discover new lands or knowledge of the world that once was, like a jerboa discovering this edible fruit from a strange tall green plant with needles all over it, and trying to compare the records of said plants with something called a saguaro. However, there was one section of players who wanted to introduce a new Leviathan to this world. This Leviathan, the Leviathan of the bimbos. The Leviathan represented the concept of bimbo and himbo, and those who were caught in its influence would be twisted into bimbos and himbos. What is this story? And the person who suggested this said it would override all other powers. Animalized people would become human bimbos and himbos, and they would all be wearing revealing clothing and be described as hot jailbait. And then there was a second proposed Leviathan that would turn men into jocks that would revel in their BO and homoeroticism. Anyway, they were told no, since this stuff was clearly fetish material, especially since their planned introduction of the Leviathans would have been for it to emerge in the midst of a capital city and bimbofy or jockify everyone nearby. This would end up getting every player character in there at the time without player consent, and that was a big no-no here, since players need to consent to certain things, and sexualized themes were just not allowed. These stereotypes argue that they were allowed to have this fetish play since we did things like described anthropomorphic rabbits stopping on the ground when they were agitated, or horses getting nervous when people walked behind them, or large creatures bumping their heads on door frames. They would also cite several people playing sexual encounters in private, even posting logs into the main out-of-character chat, where there was a rule against NSFW things since several... Well, they were told no. Again. They kept on trying to do it, only to be told no. Again. Finally, their two leaders, Jockimo and Bimbo Bread, trying to give them lame puns, just decide it happens anyway. And I log on to find several people kicked and entire scenes being scratched because Jockimo and Bimbo Bread summoned their leviathans to jockify and bimbofy everyone. Well, this causes more drama since apparently we were removing their fun, or something. Things continue as normal for a month, only for one of the players to come forth and say they received an invite to a server where Jockimo and Bimbo Bread copied all the lore. All of it, verbatim, but now made it mostly about people becoming horny idiots. Yes, very underhanded. Then it was revealed that the Bimbo and Jock factions had copied everyone's characters and then decided to do something horrible to them, as if this somehow would get a one-up on us. They finally reached out to the administrative team and asked to be reinstated, and that they would return our characters, as if what they did in their own space would somehow affect the players and how we play our characters. Don't ask me what kind of delusion these two and the others suffered from. They're treating our characters as if they were able to just copy the docs, then claim ownership of the characters and the concepts behind them. Most of the people that had followed Jockimo and Bimbo Bread ate that up, by the way. They insisted that everything that has been done to our characters is canon because I have the master files. This makes no sense, even from a crypto bro perspective. We have the master files. TLDR, boneheads get angry we won't let them turn people into bimbos and jocks that insist they have ownership of everyone. I am not even going to begin to comprehend what I just read. Every single page that I turned got more progressively insane. The world that they're playing in seems absolutely crazy, which isn't a horror story, by the way. You can create whatever world you want and play in it as long as people are having fun, even though it seems insane, to say the least. But again, as long as people are having a good time, that's all that matters. Then we get to our, I guess, problem player factions. We have those now. Never seen that before. That try to, I guess, use the power of imagination to just take control of everyone's characters, which... Okay. Look, you need to find a game that's right for you. If you're not having fun in this crazy, medieval, futuristic, furry Leviathan game, that's okay, that's fine. They can have their fun, and you can have your fun somewhere else. You can't force other players to play in your way no matter how much you try. It's just not going to work. It's best to leave and start your own game, which is what they did, only after trying to take control of their characters, which, look, that's just not how it works, guys. Come on, what are we doing? Anyway, the pure madness of the story threatens to drive me to Urle. Let's move on. Alright, and that's going to be it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Shadow for Carconos, my actual play D&D podcast, and while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment destroyed campaign to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.